Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to week 6. Week number 6 of Intro to Android Development. We're very happy that you're here with us. This week we got something really interesting. We're going to be talking about fragments this week. Just a couple of announcements. So this week we have a bi-weekly feedback form, which we're going to need you to fill out. If you did not fill out the last one, please reach out to us. They're part of your grade, so you want to make sure that you do fill them out. They're free points, and we don't want to penalize anybody. We just want to make sure that we're getting feedback because they really do help us, know what you guys are thinking of. Should we move faster? Should we move slower? Are we doing too much? Should we do less? So this is very useful information for us. So please do let us know, and how you think lectures are going, demos, things like that, homeworks. And we will try to do our best to accommodate in real time. Okay, but do fill out that bi-weekly feedback form. And just a quick congratulations to everybody. We've been looking at the homeworks, and homework 4 especially, we know, is one that can be very difficult conceptually, and everybody did amazing. So congratulations to all of you on your success, and we're happy that you're working so hard, and we do hope when you do finish this course, you do consider applying to the App Dev Android team. We love having course graduates apply to the team, and we're happy that you were able to learn as much as you did and felt motivated to apply, and so we do hope to see your application. Okay, so this week what we're going to be talking about is going to be fragments. So if you've ever had or used an app where the information on a screen is fairly complex, like you could think about the Facebook app, for example, where you could get user input, and then below that there could be information displayed, and then like a navigation bar below that, and so there's a lot of different complicated things going on in this activity. So this kind of application is not actually done the way that you think it is. It's not actually just one big activity that has everything in it. What they're actually doing is they're breaking up these little modules into separate fragments. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about. They're using fragments to basically divide the activity into parts that are easier to work with. So maybe like that input text is its own fragment, the information list that you can scroll through is another fragment, and the navigation bar maybe is part of the activity. It depends. So fragments are... How can we think about fragments? So fragments are similar to activities in the sense that they have their own life cycle. So if you remember, we were talking about the life cycle methods of activities a couple lectures before. We were talking about methods like Uncreate, Onresume, and things like that, right? And Onpause. So these sorts of methods exist for fragments as well. So fragments are similar to activities in the sense that they have their own life cycle methods, and they have their own unique layout file associated with them as well, right? That XML layout file. However, unlike activities, you don't need to declare them in your manifest. So I'm sure you guys are familiar now, you've made enough activities, but every time you're creating a new activity, you have to add it to your Android manifest.xml. We don't need to do that for fragments. So you could think about fragments as just like little chunks of the app. So the best way, I think, to exemplify what a fragment is, so we've talked a little bit about the attributes of fragments, right? They have like these lifecycle methods, they have their own layouts, stuff like that. So, but now, what exactly is it? Maybe you're still wrapping your head around what exactly a fragment is. I think the best way to look at it is to look at it in an example. Specifically, let's look at the Eatery app as an example. So in the Eatery app, right, we have three little navigation things at the bottom, right? There's the home where you have the list of eateries, right? Then there's the menus and calendars, right? You have like the calendars and the menus from the middle, right? There's this three tabs at the bottom which we use to navigate around. Then the third one is like your user. That's you, where you can see your NetID, BRBs, things like that. So we have those three little navigation buttons at the bottom, and they bring us to different screens. So this is actually done with fragments. This is actually just one main activity with three different fragments that are being changed with the navigation thing. So think about it for a second. Between each of these three screens, what is the constant? The constant between these three screens are going to be our navigation bar and this little toolbar at the top. So that's going to be what our main activity is, and then just like a big container. And in that container is where the fragments is. So fragment A is going to be the list of different eateries we can scroll through. Fragment B is going to be that calendar, every campus menu option. And the third one is going to be the BRB's NetID option. So we're just switching between one fragment to another every time you're clicking on that button. So that's what's actually happening. It's one activity switching between three different fragments. So it's really just hosting these little things. So anytime you've got complex activities that can do many different things, fragments can be used to divide the activity into parts that are easier to work with. So instead of recreating a new activity every time, right, where now I have to recreate the bottom bar, recreate the top bar, then again recreate the bottom bar, recreate the top bar, instead of doing this 3 different times, I can just keep that framework and just change the center by putting in a little fragment and changing out the fragment to be different things depending on what navigation bar button I had clicked on. Okay, so this is hopefully an example that illustrates to you what a fragment is exactly. Okay, so that's basically an overview of fragments. Now let's talk about the life cycle of fragments. So like we said, similar to activities, fragments have their own life cycle, but the main difference is that a fragment's life cycle is tied to the activity that it's hosted in. So if I have a fragment inside of the main activity, that fragment's life cycle will be tied to the main activity's life cycle, which makes sense. The only difference is essentially just this, between the fragment lifecycle and the activity lifecycle, how we can think about them. Okay, so this means that in activity's lifecycle, the events of the activity's lifecycle can affect the fragment, but the fragment cannot affect the activity's lifecycle. So it's a one-way relationship, but this should make sense, right? Imagine this same example for the eatery app. If I moved to the tab, right, and I'm getting rid of my old fragment so that I can open up this new fragment, do I want the death of that fragment to also mean the death of the activity it's hosted in? No, because in the case of the eatery app, every time I close a fragment, that would mean I'm closing the whole activity, which is not the behavior that we want, right? We don't want to close eatery every time we're moving from one screen to another, right? We don't want to close eatery when we move to the BRB screen or when we move to the calendar screen. So the fragment lifecycle does not affect the activity lifecycle, but the activity lifecycle affects the fragment lifecycle, right? If I close the main activity or the eatery app, I will also be closing the fragment. So this hopefully should be fairly intuitive. So this is the relationship between the parent activity and the fragment in terms of the life cycle. So the fragment's life cycle is basically done with 3 very important methods that we should know about. The Uncreate, which I'm sure you guys are very familiar with the Uncreate method. The Uncreate method is used when we're going to be initializing the fragment, creating any variables, things like that. The Oncreate view method is another that's going to be called when the system is first going to be drawing the user interface for that fragment. So remember, every fragment has its own layout XML, and so the first time it's drawing that up, Oncreate view could be called on to do something specific in that instance. And finally, there is Onpause. So Onpause is going to be called if the user is leaving the fragment, right? And can only happen when the onpause of the parent activity is called as well. So, in other words, when the user is going to be leaving or closing the activity. So, if I'm going to be closing the main activity or leaving the main activity, this will be called upon for the fragment as well. And so there might be something specific in the fragment you want to do, like save changes that your user had made, so the next time they open it, the changes are still there. Things like that. These are things to think about that you might want in the life cycle of your fragment. Okay, now let's talk about how do you actually take the fragment and how do you integrate it into an activity, right? Because remember, a fragment is fundamentally going to be part of an activity, right? Like we could have a fragment A inside of a main activity, and then a fragment B inside of a main activity, or a fragment A, and then later on we could swap it out with a fragment B, and we'll talk about how you can do something like that in a moment. But let's talk about how you can integrate a fragment into an activity. So the most obvious way could just be to put it in the activity itself. So if in our main activity we had a linear layout, within the linear layout you could put a little XML tag that said fragment and do all the usual attributes like height, width, and things like that for it. But this is highly discouraged and should only be thought of in theory and not done. Just because, so why is it bad practice? It's bad practice because it's sort of like hard coding. This is not something that you want to do, according to Google's guidelines for Android development, and is from very long ago when fragments were first being made as something you could use. So instead of doing that, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to create a container for the fragment, and then you can populate the fragment or a different fragment to an existing view group or layout. So think about this container as like an empty box, and the fragment will go in that empty box. And that way we have some flexibility, because if you want to take out a fragment and put in a new fragment, now you're not being bound to the actual activity. The only thing that's bound is the container. So the container will always be there. What's inside the container we can control programmatically. Okay, what do I mean when I say programmatically? I mean from the Kotlin file. From our actual program, right? This is where we're doing the programming. So from our Kotlin file we can change the thing that's in our container. But how can we do that? That's the million-dollar question here. To be able to update what is in our container, we're going to use something called a Fragment Manager. A Fragment Manager essentially is just going to be something that does exactly what it sounds like. It manages all of the active fragments in an activity, and it could also be used for getting the IDs, popping fragments to a backstack when they are paused. So this is basically putting it on hold, right? Putting it on ice. Or in this case, it's called the backstack. And listening for when to bring it back. So imagine if in my eatery app example, right, I moved from one fragment to another, then that old fragment is being put onto the backstack. Okay? And then, if I want to go back to it, it takes it from the backstack and brings it forward again. So it's got this really great stateful thing where it can save the previous fragment onto the backstack and bring it forward, and it is exactly a stack. It's a data structure that is implemented like a stack. And then to do things with our Fragment Manager, we have Fragment Transactions. So Fragment Transactions will be used if you're going to be swapping one fragment for another, if you're going to be adding a fragment into a container, things like this. And how does it look to do a transaction? So 3 steps. The first step is going to be begin transaction. Then we do whatever we want to do. Could be replacing, could be adding, whatever. Then we commit. Okay, those are our 3 steps. Begin, actually do the thing, and then commit. Okay, very good. So you could replace one fragment with another. So to do that, you would say Fragment Manager dot begin transaction dot replace, and the replace function would take in the first argument being the ID of the container in which you want to replace the fragment it holds, and then the fragment which you want to put into that container, and then you would say dot commit at the very end. Okay, and you could also do dot add instead, and you'd say dot begin transaction dot add, same for the container, the fragment you want to add to it, and then dot commit, and so forth and so forth and so forth. And you could also call on add to backstack if you want to add the fragment to the backstack, if say you're going to be replacing it. If you do add it to the backstack, then you could have it so that when you click the back button, what Android will do, since it's on the backstack, is it'll go back to the previous fragment. And I actually lied a little bit. The Eatery app does not do this. We don't actually add to the backstack because it's not really necessary for a simple app like Eatery, just because they're not sort of continuous fragments. So when you click the back button, it'll actually close the Eatery app, not move to the previous fragment, because we're not calling on add to backstack. And you can see that yourself. And if any of you guys are so inclined, Eatery is an open sourced application. So you could go to the GitHub repo, clone Eatery, and remake it so that you add in the add to backstack, and then push it, and who knows? If you do that, then your code could end up on the Play Store, because we actively accept contributions from the community since all of our apps are open sourced. But I digress. Okay, now let's begin talking about the next piece of Fragments, which is going to be the actual implementation of the fragment itself. So we've talked about how we use the Fragment Manager, how we use Fragment Transactions, and things like this, and now let's talk about actually making the fragments themselves. So a common way to use Fragment is with a Viewpager. So a Viewpager basically is a special type of container that lets you switch between 2 different fragments. So once again, thinking back to our Eatery app, we have one screen where there's a lunch and then there's a dinner, right? And if I click on lunch, it'll populate with the lunch menu. And if I click on dinner, it'll populate with the dinner menu. So this is an example of a Viewpager because I'm switching between 2 different fragments, right? The lunch fragment and the dinner fragment. And when I click on that button, then I see my lunch fragment. When I click on the dinner fragment, I see the dinner menu. Another way, instead of clicking on a button to do it, is you could have done a swipe, right? Imagine swiping from one fragment to another, right? Swiping from one screen to another. You can sort of think about the Snapchat app as the most common or popular implementation of this sort of Viewpager of fragment to fragment. But let's sort of think about how we would be able to do something like this. So there's a more full example of an implementation on the textbook of the lunch and dinner fragments. But basically, what we want to do is we just want to think about it from a high level. So because a fragment is going to be inheriting from a different parent than an activity would, just know that you need to get the root. You need to get the root view if you want to be able to call on methods that are defined in our activity, like find view by ID. So think about it like this. An activity typically An activity will be the child of the parent app-compat activity, whereas a fragment will be the child of an activity, which is the child of app-compat activity. So a function like let's see, find view by ID, for example, is something that's defined in an activity and not defined in our fragment. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to get the root view, right? That's going to be our activity view, and then say that root view dot find view by ID if you want to call on that function. So it's not that we don't have access to it anymore, it's just now you need to take an extra step to have access to it from the activity, because it's now not defined within our fragment itself. Okay? So we can create a Viewpager adapter class, and what this will do is it'll manage the changing of fragments for us. So we have full control over this process, and from the code associated with it, you can see each page in the Viewpager is associated with a fragment. And there's some nifty functional programming syntax you can use in Kotlin, which I'll have on the screen here. Okay, and we can also add the Viewpager adapter to our activity now, so that we can use it. And then in our XML, for our main activity, we place it as a parent of whatever our root layout is. So if we had a linear layout, we'd put our Viewpager within our linear layout, and then boom, you've now done an implementation of a Viewpager. So this is not the only way that you can go between different fragments, but we recommend it, and this will be what you're going to be using on your homework for this week. So do look at the implementation example from the textbook. Okay, so for sharing data between fragments, this is the last thing we're going to be talking about for today. There's just one little caveat that we need to talk about. So when I have fragment A, and I want to send something to fragment B, I cannot send directly from fragment A to fragment B, because we want fragments to be sort of standalone things that can be taken out, put in, taken out, like interchangeable things. So for that reason, we use the parent activity as the sort of hub of communication. So the flow of information will go from fragment A to our main activity, back to fragment B. So it's going to be this sort of process for sending from one fragment to another. So there's a lot of different ways to actually send data between one fragment to another, and Google has changed what they say about what is preferred over time, changing it. And if you'd like to look into a different one, then you should look into something called live data or singleton classes for a more robust implementation. But what we're going to teach you is going to be the good old-fashioned bundle method. So it's good practice to prevent fragments from communicating directly with each other, which is why we're basically going to say just don't do it at all, because we want to build these good habits now so that we don't have to re-educate ourselves on what is good practice and what is bad practice later on. So remember, it's going to go from fragment A to the parent activity to fragment B. So let's take a look at what that means specifically. Okay, so in this case, fragment A is going to be our sender activity. So we're going to set up the interface to do what is known as a callback. So it's going to be calling back to the activity, and it's going to be creating an interface data pass listener, which will then later on be implemented in the activity. So in this case, on button press is the function is a function we're going to want to be overridden in our activity, so we'll put it in our interface. And then we're going to create a callback, then in our parent activity, what we're going to do is we are going to implement the interface from Fragment A, and we're going to write all of the logic and everything involved with that interface, and pass the correct information now to the receiver fragment. So what that means for us is after we override that function, we're also going to create a bundle, put things in the bundle, and then send it to now fragment B using a fragment transaction. And remember, who does our fragment transaction? The Fragment Manager. So the Fragment Manager will do a fragment transaction. And how do we do fragment transactions? We do begin transaction, do the actual transaction, and then commit transaction. So in this case, begin, we're going to be replacing, right? We're going to be replacing fragment A with fragment B and sending some data from fragment A to fragment B, and then committing it. Okay? Then finally, in fragment B, we're going to retrieve the data that was sent from the extras, and now we can use it as needed. Okay, so this method is known as the callback pattern, and this is going to be what we're going to be using. Like I said, if you're interested in a more robust implementation, you can look at live data, which is supported by Google, or singleton classes, which is a little bit more complex in terms of data transfer. But we will just be focusing on the more simple bundle version for right now. And if you feel so inclined, by all means, please do look at it, and I'm sure it has its own rewards individually for doing those rather than doing the bundle. But that will be the end of this week's lecture. Just want to thank you guys again for all the hard work you guys have been putting in. We're so proud of you guys. Keep up the great work. We're going to end strong this semester, and we hope the hackathon will go well after we complete the curriculum for this semester. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it along to Jesse, who's going to be doing this week's demo. Thank you guys, and we'll see you next week.
Hello everyone, welcome to the 6th week of Android development. This week we're going to be talking about fragments. So in week 5 and week 4, we have been talking about list views and recycle views, all of which help you to kind of manage like row items that are similar to each others. However, this week we're going to be learning about how to manage views, a whole layout that are similar to each other. And you can imagine this, you can think about this as if it's a really, really large recycler view between different layouts. So we're gonna start off by creating a fragment. We can click right on any of, actually you can click like into any of this folder and just click right and say new and create a fragment. In this case, we're just gonna have a blank fragment, and you will be giving name to the fragment. I'm just gonna call it blank for now. It's similar to how you create an activity. Okay, so after you created a fragment class, a lot of code has been already there for you. All of them are code that you can work with. Let's just first have a look of what is already in the code. In the Uncreate method, it basically takes in parameters that the fragments can take. The parameters are saved in the save instance state bundle. And you can gather parameters by using argument let and it get string or it get whatever object type that your parameter is in. So where did these parameters come from? Well, it comes from when other classes is calling your blank activity, blank fragment dot new instance is kind of like a new whatever class name kind of thing in Java. So basically, if any other class called blank fragment dot new instance and parentheses with different parameters, all of this is just gonna go in here and be set it to the class variable. So you can actually change like the parameter types here. It's kind of the constructor of the fragment class. And the Uncreate view method is kind of like the Uncreate method for activities, which it takes care of to define the main layout for the fragment, and you can also get like components inside the main layout of the fragment. Let's say that, oh, okay, so in this layout, a text view is already defaulted given to you. Let's say if we want to get this text view in the fragment programmatically. So instead of just return this whole root view of the main fragment layout, let's set it actually to a variable of view. And we can also first declare a late initialized variable for the text view because we might need to use it in different places. And in the Uncreate view method, we say text view equals to view dot find view by ID is the old thing that you guys should be kind of already familiar with yourself with. Okay, actually I just forgot to give this text view an ID. Let's just name it TV standing for text view. And here we have a variable that represents this text view in the fragment. Okay. Okay. And also still remember that we need to, like, for the Uncreate view function, we need to return a view object, like a root view object, so that the fragment class knows which layout is this class mainly deal with. So let's just say return view, or actually let's call it root. It might make more sense intuitively. Let's just rename it. This is just a review of how do you refactor stuff without changing them one by one. Okay. So now, how would you be working with fragments? Okay, remember I said that fragments kind of help you to generate and work with multiple layouts that are similar to each other, having similar structures. So how do you call them? Well, when you go to the main activity, to the layout of the main activity, you can use a component called Viewpager 2. It's Viewpager 2 instead of Viewpager 1 because it's the updated version of Viewpager 1. Viewpager 1 only enables you to like swipe horizontally and in just one direction. It's not as convenient. Viewpager 2 is basically an updated version of Viewpager 1. So basically, the Viewpager enables you to demonstrate multiple fragments in kinds of like in a way that you can skip swiping it, kind of like a huge recycle view or something like that. Okay, let's just call this Viewpager. Actually, let's just call it pager. And instead of wrap content, let's just say match parent because we may want our fragment just to take up the whole space. Okay, let's go back to the main activity. First of all, let's create an instance of the Viewpager. Oh. And then in the Uncreate, we do the same thing. We do pager equals find view by ID r.pager. Similar to how recycle views and list view needs an adapter. View pagers is kind of like the recycle view of layouts. It also needs an adapter and we need to kind of create it. But it's kind of a simple implementation. So instead of creating like a whole brand new colon file, we might just create an inner class for the view pager adapter in this main activity. spelled this wrong. Okay. So here is the Viewpager adapter. It's basically extending the fragment state adapter. It's basically telling you that when you are swiping the Viewpager, going to different fragment inside the Viewpager, what's gonna happen to each of the fragments. That's what fragment state adapter means. So here, whenever you are kind of extending or implementing a different class, you have to kind of implement all like the methods it has. It's kind of like implementing interface in Java. So Android Studio can actually just notify you if there's like method that you need to kind of implement, and you can just click into the underline and just say implement members. Okay, the first method we need to implement is called get item count. It's basically asking you how many fragments do you need inside this Viewpager. For like a better coding style purposes, let's create a constant on the top of the class. Like for better coding style purposes, let's create a constant for the class variable of this class instead of just changing a number here all the time. Because if you are in the future working with a larger code base, you might don't want to like keep scrolling down until you find this method and change it. You can just change everything in the top. Let's say the number of page is just gonna be 6. Remember, if you're creating something like a constant variable, or constant value, you might just have the name of the constant being all capitalized. And in this case, we're just gonna say return num-page, which is gonna return 6. It means we're gonna create 6 fragments according to like this layout and this code kind of inside this. Okay, so most important part of this Viewpager adapter is the create fragment method. It's gonna return a fragment for each of the pages or for each of the position inside the Viewpager. So you can either have all of the fragments inside your Viewpager having the same structure, the same layout, or you can have multiple fragments in the same Viewpager. So how could you have multiple fragments in the same Viewpager? Imagine the homework, in your wallpaper homework, you might want to have like a home fragment that can kind of introduce what's going on in your app, and you might want to have other fragments that just contains all the wallpaper. So let's just say if position equals to 0, return fragment. Else, let's say return blank fragment, and see we need to call a new instance, which is like calling this method. It's basically saying we're creating a fragment according to this kind of structure. Let's say we wanna the first parameter for the blank fragment to be position, and we also need to make it to string because it's not a string, it's just an integer. And let's say we want the second parameter to be hello world. And let's just go to the blank fragment. And we want to set off these parameters to like something in the layout, so we know that we have gotten the data, we have gotten the parameters passed into the fragment. So in this case, let's say text view dot text equals to parameter second plus parameter 1. Okay, now actually the first fragments that we were returning, we have not implemented yet. So we might just as well, for demoing purposes, just create a simple fragments, like a home fragment. So you guys will see like how it actually appears in the emulator. Oh. Fragment. Let's just call it home fragment. And inside the home fragment, let's just have it say like, yeah, let's just have it say hello home blank. Oh, let's just say hello home fragment for now. Also inside the home fragment, let's just have it not taking any parameters. It's kind of just like a constant fragment. You can delete all of this. And yeah, this should be good for now. And go back to the main activity. Instead of returning just a fragment class in general, let's return a home fragment dot new instance. Okay, after we fully set up the adapter for the Viewpager, let's just assign the adapter of the pager to the Viewpager adapter that we just created. And oh yes, the Viewpager adapter takes in an activity. It's basically gonna be the current activity that the Viewpager is in. So we can just say this to represent the main activity. And let's just run the emulator and see how it works. Okay, see the first layout we got is the home fragment, and we swipe to the next page. It's gonna be home hello world 1, hello world 2, hello world 3, all the way until hello world 5. Okay, so as I said, Viewpager 2 is having a better functionality than Viewpager 1. So other things you can do with this Viewpager is that you can go to the main activity and you find a Viewpager 2, and you can say if you want to have the layout to be swiped from left to right or right to left. Like you can set that, and that's just a new functionality. So now we have set it that is swipe from right to left. See, this case, if you're starting from the main activity and you want to swipe to the right, it's not gonna work. But if you swipe backward, it's working. And in the original Viewpager, it's not gonna work this way. Another problem that you guys might be encountering when you guys are doing homework is that how could I use my app to set a wallpaper for my phone? First of all, it definitely sounds like something that would need some permission, because if any app can just change your wallpaper, this app would be kind of like virus app. It's kind of crazy. So let's go to the Android manifest and call for user permission for set wallpaper. Let's just close the tag. And in the main activity, we will also add a button that says if you click this button, it's going to set a wallpaper. When you're actually doing the homework, it should probably not be in the main activity. But I'm just gonna put it in the main activity for now. Let's just say we're gonna leave some space in the main activity for this button. So margin top equals 50. We leave some space in the top that's not part of the fragment. And we add a button. The width should be match parent. The height should be 50. because that's all the spaces left. Just say constraint to the start of parent and the constraint to the top of parent. And let's give this button an ID that says like set wallpaper or something. For the text on the button, let's also have something like set wallpaper. Okay, going back to the main activity, let's also set a class variable for this button. Let's just call it, let's just get it from the layout. So in order for this wallpaper thing to work, we should first call a Wallpaper Manager. Okay, so the Wallpaper Manager constructor gets context as a parameter. So I basically just pass in application context, and we can just use this. And we want the wallpaper to be updated by the time that the button is clicked. So let's just call an onClick listener. And inside onClick listener, we will call the Wallpaper Manager, which set resource. And it should be, okay, the set resource method should take in a raw file of a picture, basically. So what you can do is you can right click on the resource folder and create a new Android resource directory, and the resource type should be raw, and click OK. And basically, you will just be moving whatever picture you have to this folder, showed in your local Explorer. And yes, I already moved a background image inside this folder. And let's just say r.raw.Cornell background. And let's just run the emulator and see what's gonna happen. Okay, so let's just click set wallpaper, and we go to the front page of the app, and you can see a wallpaper is already set for this phone. Thank you guys for listening. Have a great week and good luck on your wallpaper homework. I hope you guys all can enjoy picking some good wallpapers.